Right now, you're reading these words, and inside your head, a voice is saying them back to you. You didn't decide to do that. It just happens. Language runs in you like breathing, so automatically that it feels less like a skill and more like a sense, something you were simply born knowing. But you weren't. Somewhere in the deep past, humans had no words at all. No grammar, no names for things, no way to say there's a lion behind that rock, except to point and scream. And then somehow, we built the most complex system our species has ever produced. Thousands of separate languages, each with its own rules, out of absolutely nothing. Nobody sat down and invented it. So, how did it actually happen? The answer is one of the hardest problems in all of science, and the pieces we do have are stranger than any myth. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. We may never know exactly how the first language began, because words leave no fossils. A stone tool survives for 2 million years. A spoken sentence vanishes the instant it's said. For most of human history, there was no writing to record any of it, which means the birth of language happened entirely in a blind spot. This is why, back in 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris officially banned all papers on the origin of language. They were so tired of endless unprovable theories that they made the topic forbidden. For over a century, serious scientists mostly avoided it. It was considered a career-ending question. That didn't stop people from guessing, and the early guesses are so charming that linguists gave them mocking nicknames. There was the bow wow theory, the idea that the first words were imitations of natural sounds, like a dog's bark becoming the word for dog. There was the poo-poo theory, that language began as instinctive emotional cries, ouch, ha, ugh, slowly hardening into words. There was the ding-dong theory, the yo-he-ho theory, that language grew out of the grunts of people doing heavy labor together, and the la-la theory, that it came from song and play. Each one captures a sliver of something real, but none can explain the giant leap from noise to grammar, from a shout to a sentence. Making a sound is not language. A parrot makes sounds. What makes human language unique is structure, the ability to take a handful of words and rearrange them into infinite new meanings. So when did that capacity actually appear? Here the timeline is enormous and hotly debated. Some researchers, based on genetic evidence, argue the biological machinery for language, the brain wiring and vocal control, was already in place in Homo sapiens at least 135,000 years ago, and possibly entered widespread social use around 100,000 years ago. Others push it far deeper. One landmark study of tool-making, brain size, and anatomy argues that rudimentary language may go back 1.6 million years to Homo erectus, our ancestor who spread across the world, controlled fire, and cooperated in ways that are hard to imagine without some form of communication. The gap between those two estimates, 100,000 years versus 1.6 million, tells you how genuinely open this question still is. But here's the key insight modern researchers keep returning to. Language almost certainly did not begin with the mouth. It began with the hands. Before our ancestors had fine vocal control, they had gesture. Watch any two people who don't share a language try to communicate at an airport, and within seconds they're pointing, miming, shaping objects in the air. That impulse is ancient and instinctive. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, communicate far more flexibly with gestures than with vocal calls. The leading theory is that human language grew up as a multimodal system, gestures and sounds together, and only gradually shifted its center of gravity into the voice, freeing the hands to do other work while walking, carrying, and tool-making. And what drove all of this? The single most powerful engine was other people. Humans are the most social species on the planet, and social life creates relentless pressure to communicate more precisely. If your survival depends on cooperating, sharing food, coordinating a hunt, teaching a child which plants are poison, warning about a rival group, then even a slightly better communicator has a real advantage. Being able to say not just danger, but danger, two men, coming from the river, at night could mean the difference between your family living or dying. Every generation, the people who could share more exact meaning tended to do a little better, and that pressure, compounded over tens of thousands of years, slowly sculpted vague signals into structured language. Now, here's the part that makes this whole story more than speculation, because there's one case where we actually watched a brand new language be born from scratch, and it happened within living memory. In Nicaragua, before the late 1970s, deaf people were mostly isolated, each using private hand signs known only to their own family. Then, in 1977, the government opened a school for deaf children in Managua. The teachers tried to force the kids to lip read and speak Spanish, which failed almost completely. But something extraordinary was happening outside the classroom, in the schoolyard and on the buses, for the first time. Hundreds of deaf children were together in one place, and they began combining their scattered home signs into a shared system. At first it was crude, just pointing and pantomime. But then the younger children arrived, and they did something the older kids couldn't. They took that rough, inconsistent system and transformed it. They added grammar, verb agreement, and consistent rules that nobody taught them. Within a couple of decades, sequential waves of young children had turned a jumble of gestures into Nicaraguan Sign Language, a full, rich language with its own vocabulary and structure, unrelated to Spanish or any other tongue. Linguists arrived to study it and realized they were witnessing something never recorded before in history, a language being created out of thin air. And the crucial detail is who created it. Not the adults. The little kids, the youngest children, under the age of 10, were the ones generating the grammar. The older students copied the structure the little ones invented. That discovery points at something profound about our species. The human capacity to create language isn't just about learning, it's about building. Children don't simply absorb the language around them, they actively improve it, imposing order and rules even when the input they receive is messy and incomplete. We see the same thing in the history of Creoles. When adults from different language backgrounds are thrown together, often in the brutal conditions of colonial plantations, they first develop a pidgin, a rough, grammarless mashup of words just good enough to trade and give orders. But when children grow up hearing that pidgin, they don't leave it broken. In a single generation, they transform it into a Creole, a complete language with full grammar, filling in everything the adults left out. The kids do automatically what no committee of scholars could design. This is why most linguists today no longer picture a single dramatic moment of invention, one genius who spoke the first word. Instead, they describe a layered emergence. Early humans communicated with gestures and cries. Social cooperation created constant pressure for clearer, shareable meaning. Biology slowly shaped brains and throats capable of handling complex sequences, and then culture took over as the great engine of refinement, with each new generation of children learning, tweaking, and passing on the system, generation after generation, for thousands of years. Language wasn't built, it grew, from the bottom up, mostly in the minds of the young, and it never stopped growing. That same process is why we don't all speak one language today. As humans migrated across the planet, groups drifted apart and their speech drifted with them. Sounds shifted, words changed meaning, grammar mutated, and over centuries a single language would split into many. Contact between groups added more churn, borrowing, mixing, conquest, and trade, constantly reshaping how people spoke. The result is roughly 7,000 languages alive today, every one of them a living, changing descendant of those first ancient, fragile attempts to turn breath and gesture into shared meaning. So here's the full picture. Nobody invented language. There was no first word carved in stone, no inventor's name to remember. Instead, our ancestors pointed, gestured, cried out, and cooperated, and under the endless pressure of needing each other, those signals slowly deepened into structure. Then children, generation after generation, did the real work, taking whatever rough system they were handed and quietly building it into something whole. It's still happening. Every child alive is rebuilding language from the inside, and every time you speak, you're using an invention that no single human ever made, one that took our entire species and all of its children to create.